countries and boosting the strength of domestic demand in their own economies. And we at the same time as we've been working with the Europeans to resolve the European crisis, we've also been working hard at the G20 to encourage the emerging economies to take steps to ensure that their own growth momentum is sustained by boosting their own domestic demand momentum and by adopting more flexible exchange rate regimes, which we think are fully consistent with and would encourage this shift in the pattern of global demand growth.
Thank you. My time is expired.
Vice Chairman Dole, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Collins, thank you again for being here. I'd like to discuss, if I could, just your thoughts on International Monetary Fund's role in resolving the European crisis. And could you tell me and tell us, the panel, how the IMF is assisting the European countries and how the IMF's participation benefits the United States, and if you could, the degree which the IMF participation exposes the American taxpayers to potential losses?
The IMF is playing a crucial role in Europe through a variety of channels. The most obvious one, of course, is the financial channel. The IMF has contributed around a third of the financial resources that have been provided.
Can you give me just a rough estimate of what a third is?
A third is around maybe $150 billion. It's around a third of the total commitments by the European economies. The IMF is also playing a crucial role in the design of the adjustment programs, and it plays a crucial role as an independent partner with the European countries to make sure that the adjustment programs are strong and well designed and able to address the fundamental issues. So we are, in the Treasury, strong proponents of the IMF playing this role. As I mentioned before, the IMF can play and has played a critical part in sustaining global financial stability through this crisis management role without exposing U.S. taxpayers to the risk of material losses. The IMF has a very strong record of getting repaid by countries, given its preferred creditor status. We believe that the IMF can continue to play this very strong role, but as I've said, it needs to be in conjunction with the European commitment to the right policies and the European commitment of adequate financing.
Secretary Collins, from the U.S. economic perspective, what do you think are the most sensitive issues in resolving the Eurozone's economic problems, from our perspective?
From our perspective, the key issue is really containing the contagion effects. As investors are concerned about possible implications of what's happening in the relatively small countries in the periphery, what are the implications for larger countries in Europe that have relatively slow rates of growth and relatively high rates of public debt. These are countries that are much more significant in terms of their trading relations and financial relations with the United States. If there were to be a further deterioration in investor confidence in these countries, that would clearly have a very dangerous impact on U.S. financial markets and global financial markets. So the key instrument that is needed is to create imposing firewalls that break the connection between countries in difficult situations like Greece with the stronger countries that are closer to the Eurozone core. We know the Europeans are working hard. We've heard about various devices that they are looking for to leverage the resources that they have set aside in the FSF to build this firewall. So that's a very important task in the days ahead, is to provide a mechanism that will work effectively, that will be a mechanism that the markets can work with to continue to provide adequate fiscal resources or adequate financing to meet countries' fiscal needs.
Secretary Collins, there are those that believe the reason why the focus has not been on the United States is because of the problems in Europe right now and that we're going to be next. Do you believe that the United States has a similar spending problem as Europe does? And how would you compare Europe's problems to our problems? What are the similarities and what are the main differences?
The United States clearly has a serious fiscal issue over the medium term.
Medium term being defined as what?
And the administration has committed to a very substantial reduction in the fiscal deficit over the next few years. Under the President's plan, the fiscal deficit will be reduced very sharply over the next 3 years, and it will be put on a path that will lower the public debt to GDP ratio, consistent with our commitments to the G20 at the Toronto summit. At the same time, however, the United States does not face the short-term fiscal pressures that are faced by some countries in Europe. We believe that there is an important role for providing additional fiscal support to the U.S. economy over the next year or so to maintain the momentum of the present recovery. The present recovery is not as strong as we would like. The progress on raising employment and reducing the unemployment rate has not been as strong as we would like, and we think it would make sense to provide some additional fiscal support to slow the pace of fiscal consolidation. In Europe, there are other countries outside the periphery that also have maintained the confidence of markets, and where the imperative of fiscal consolidation is not as urgent. A country like Germany, for example, although its debt to GDP ratio is quite high, it does have room to within the constraints of its own debt brake. It has room to let automatic stabilizers work to support the German economy, which will play an important part in sustaining the momentum of growth in Europe. So fiscal issues are certainly important in the U.S. Over the medium term, but if we are able to put in place a convincing and credible approach to dealing with these issues, that would also provide us with room to taking steps to support our economy in the short term and supporting American jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Mr. Carson, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Collins, in the wake of the 2009 financial crisis, the U.S. passed comprehensive financial regulatory reform designed to promote transparency, monitor systemic risk in the financial system, and ensure that U.S. financial institutions can withstand shocks to the system. How have these reforms improved the ability of U.S. regulatory authorities and financial institutions to mitigate the impact on the U.S. financial market of economic turmoil in Europe?
I think the financial reforms have played an important part in strengthening the resilience of the U.S. financial system and helping to contain potential risk coming from Europe in a number of different ways. One is that the United States banks are much more strongly capitalized today than they were before the 2008 financial crisis.
You need to move the microphone a little closer. We're having trouble hearing you here.
The largest U.S. banks now have average Tier 1 core capital to risk-weighted asset ratio of over 10%, substantially higher than it was back in 2008. There has also been a major reduction in reliance on market funding, on wholesale funding to fund U.S. bank lending, and a substantial improvement in the liquidity situation of American banks. All of this is consistent with the stronger capital, liquidity, and funding requirements put in place by Dodd-Frank. In addition to this, Dodd-Frank has put in place important mechanisms to make sure that U.S. regulators work closely with U.S. banks to anticipate potential risk events. In particular, the Financial Stability Oversight Committee, the FSOC, has met frequently to assess potential risks, and supervisors have benefited from the insights of this work to work closely with financial institutions here in the United States to strengthen the financial institutions' capacity to deal with potential risk events coming out of Europe.
What is the role for the G20 in coordinating policy responses?
The G20 has played an important part and continues to play an important part. And one area where its role is crucial is in this financial regulatory area. The Dodd-Frank legislation has put in place a very strong, very high standards set of regulatory requirements in the United States. But it's important that the leading financial centers around the world also adopt high standard regulatory framework consistent with what we are doing in the U.S. And the G20 has played an important part in making sure that this is achieved. The G20 has also provided a forum in which challenges to global stability, such as those coming out of Europe, are discussed, and where key countries, emerging market countries, can also express their concerns. So, for example, in G20 meetings, the situation in Europe is discussed extensively, and the concerns that are expressed, it's not just the United States that is expressing concerns, but also the large emerging market countries are also expressing their deep concerns, and I think helping the Europeans understand the critical importance of addressing their issues in a fundamental and decisive way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Mercado, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. How is what is happening in the Eurozone and the policy prescriptions that are being put forward differ from what the United States did during the TARP situation back in 2008?
Well, in some respects, there are similarities, but there are also important institutional differences, of course, between the U.S. and Europe. Important similarity is that this is a crisis of confidence, and a crisis that has led to a huge increase in uncertainty with potentially very negative impact, if not contained. Both here in the U.S. and in Europe, what is needed, therefore, is an overwhelming, powerful response to reduce concerns, to reduce the uncertainty, to reassure investors that the situation is being contained. In Europe, it's been more difficult to put this decisive response in place because of institutional constraints. There are 17 members of the Eurozone, and they all need to reach agreement on steps to establish and develop these crisis resolution mechanisms. That has taken time. And politics is always complicated, but now we're talking about the politics in a multiplicity of countries. There's also a difference in the role of the European Central Bank, the ECB,